Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Let me have a look that we're actually live and that there are some people here. This is not the first time we're using this, but this is the first time we're using this software for Vienna.go. So let me just have a look and verify.
Yeah, YouTube streaming. We are all good.
Awesome. 11 watching. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Please give us feedback on the tool we're using. If you have anything, ideas on how we could do stuff better, if there's something you liked, we would also like to know. But we have some nice features here, like we will be able to highlight questions from you in the chat. So during the talk, please, or even now, please post any comments. I will be able to show, like you see, Rodolfo, co-organizer here, sent a comment in the chat, and we can highlight those things. It's really handy for questions and for discussion after the talk. But all of that out of the way, my name is Robert. Most of you will maybe have been to our physical meetups before. And with me today, I have...
Rodolfo.
Yes. Yeah, maybe a tiny bit so everyone knows about the current situation. If you haven't, you have been literally under a rock, I guess, for the last month or two. I feel blessed that I can do this from my living room. I still have my job and I have the ability to do home office. My kids are in homeschool. So even though it's stressful at times, as for everyone in Austria and also the surrounding countries, I know there's people that are having it worse, and maybe even some of you viewers. So I hope we can give you some relief and some entertainment and some educational input and some yeah, yeah. Yes, giving you some nice stream at least instead of our local meetups. For the foreseeable future, the meetups will be held virtual. The only thing we need for the next meetup is again talks. If we don't have talks, we'll maybe just do a half an hour chat and see if you guys want to discuss something in the chat. But we are open for any format. Cool.
Send messages to us if you want to give a talk.
Yes, please do. So today we're doing the intro now. Rodolfo, do you want to say some words?
Yeah, so it's kind of sad that we are not doing this live as we normally do in person, but I'm also happy that we can still organize our monthly meetups and stay in touch. Yeah, so today we'll have a talk by Christian, immediate mode GUIs in Go. And before we go to that, we also have we hear a little bit about our sponsor and a bit more about what's going on in the Go community.
As always, you can find us. I don't think I'll be live tweeting anything today, but we have a Twitter account that has been active at the last meetups. And we also have, of course, the Meetup account. Some of you might have fallen into this via my private YouTube channel. The reason we're still there is that now you need one phone number, can only verify 2 channels on YouTube, and I apparently have more than one. So we'll see if we can figure out that till next time. Sorry for the confusion that we're on my private channel. Still, I think we were last time, but I was in time. A couple of days ago, I checked it out, but it stopped me because I had already used my phone number for 2 accounts. Yeah. So we normally say a bit about conferences upcoming, and that's a bit of a mute point at this point in time. There's an article, the last published article at the Go blog. You can just go to Golang.org and you'll find the blog from there. There's a write-up of the current situation, providing online training, and conferences and meetups are now virtual or not happening or postponed. Plans for Go.
Yeah, there's still plan to ship 1.15 on time. It just might get less features, or like everybody's basically working at reduced capacity as everyone else in the world, I guess.
Yeah. So feel free to have a look at that. And we'll have some updates next time if there is some changes to the situation. As we mentioned in May, we don't have a talks planned yet. So if you'd like to give a talk, even if it's just a 5-minute talk or a 2-minute talk, like, hey, I found this cool thing, or hey, I published this repo, you should look at it and you want to share a slide about that, that's cool. If you are curious about giving talks but haven't given before, feel free to reach out to me. Maybe also Rodolfo, but I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'd be happy to help shape a talk and the slides and mentor you if you'd like to get some pointers of giving a talk. So we'll help make it happen if you are curious and want to present something in front of this small online crowd. We do have more meetups, as always, sponsored by the same sponsor where I also work. Also, in addition to this, I organize Vienna.js, and for these 2 meetups, FreeCodeCamp and Vue.js, they are happening now virtual. For Vienna.js, not virtual so far. That might change. But these are mainly front-end centric meetups, with the exception of FreeCodeCamp being also back-end, but mostly JavaScript back-end centric. As for the sponsor, not so much to say. If we were to meet in person, we would have given you pizza and drinks. Now we can just facilitate this by
Can offer popcorn.
Yes, and we are also prepared some virtual emoji snacks for you. What was I gonna say? We are looking for people, maybe not as intensively, but Mike, also EbCont, is doing quite well despite the current situation. So if you see something on our websites open, feel free to have a look. We are always looking for Java developers, especially. Unfortunately, Golang is maybe something you could do in operations positions at us, but I don't know what the current positions are. We are not really a Golang-centric company, unfortunately, but we do have roles on offer on anything from project manager to a business analyst to JavaScript developer to Java developer, etc. So feel free to have a look. Yes. I think that's mainly it. Before we start the talk from Christian today, let me see here. As I mentioned in the beginning, and for those of you who joined afterwards, feel free to put your questions during the talk in the chat. We will focus mainly on having questions after the talk, unless Christian shouts out, and we'll try to improvise something. But just know that if you post questions, they aren't addressed immediately. We'll try to go through them all so you get a chance to get it answered after the talk. What tool it is we're using is called StreamYard. You can check it out at streamyard.com. They also have a free version. My company is paying for a paid version, but we can do some of this nice logo branding and stuff. Yeah. So without further ado, the talk is planned to be, I think it's the first time the talk is presented. We're aiming to max 30 minutes, but I don't think we know if it's going to be 15 or 29 minutes. So, just so you know the timeline here, feel free to shout, Christian, if I said something wrong.
Will be a surprise for all, yes.
Yes. And the plan is that this will be recorded. That hasn't failed me so far, so it will be available afterwards, and we'll post the link. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Christian, and then afterwards we're open for questions, both to the talk, and if you want to discuss something in the group, we'll do that then. Thank you. And welcome, Christian. Thanks for joining us for the talk today.
Well, hello, Robert. Hello, Rodolfo. Thank you for having me. So my name is Christian Haas. I'm a developer, and I've been developing on Go or with Go about since version 1.3 of Go, I believe, so a few years now, and almost exclusively as a hobby project. So during all these years, I did some hobby projects on various tinkering around. And what I'm going to present today, or at least talk about today, is about immediate mode graphical user interfaces in Go. So how did I come to this? First of all, my most recent project, or well, hobby project, is a level editor written in Go. This means, yes, a level editor for a computer game, a rather old computer game named System Shock from 1994. And I created a level editor because, first of all, there was none available. And second, it proved a great, let's say, working ground to get more used to Go and also keep up the practice, so to speak. So I started with this about in the year 2015 when I picked this project up again, and soon thought about creating a level editor in the combination with, say, a browser interface and or a native interface, with the intention of having the backend written in Go. And here you see the screenshot of a quite early version of that editor in 2016, where at the top, so the screen is split in half vertically. Top half shows the browser version with the top-down view of a level of the computer game, and on the left side with some basic controls for selecting some properties from the level and modifying them. And the same thing was also implemented in the lower half of the screen for the native standalone application, which opened up a separate window. And in the text, in the console where you started the application, you had some very basic text interface, text mode interface. It was kind of a proof of concept, can you do it, implementation based on the same code base, and then either compiled natively in Go using a text library for a text user interface, and using WebGL in the browser. No, sorry, this was even before WebGL. This was even trying to have various divs with images set by a JavaScript library. And first it was transpiled with Gopher.js, and then added some JavaScript libraries to get better at that. Though quite soon I realized this multi-mode is not very useful, or at least very cumbersome and more work than I intended to. So I switched back to an integrated variant where I had just one window with OpenGL, and the user interface was also in OpenGL. So what user interface? Since I had none, I rolled my own. So essentially, with very basic components like a button, a slider, and a label, even perhaps a combo box, I wrote the very simple elements. And here on the left side, you see the new list of properties being presented for whatever was selected in the graphical side from the level. And this was very rudimentary, so it didn't get any better. So then further variants, this was even the final version that I released in 2017. And it worked to some degree. So when you roll your own user interface, at one point you get into limits. The most prominent one for me, at least, was that I did not implement any scroll behavior. So if this list of properties on this left side became too big to be displayed in the window, well, you didn't reach those properties. So that's one limitation of that, at least. So I was hoping, or at least I wanted to have a better user interface. And due to various reasons, I rewrote the whole thing from scratch. And finally then, in 2018, I could release the second editor. So I wrote even two level editors. And this one now used user interface library and already provided way more capabilities. So yeah, here you can see barely, first of all, I managed to get the same look and feel with the coloring. Yet you have, let's say at the top, for instance, a menu bar, you have windows, you have sliders, and all the fancy cool things that you can have with an already existing user interface library without writing it yourself. So the common knowledge, or at least from my side, was, well, there is no official user interface library for Go. So how did I get into this state to have a user interface library available and the whole thing written in Go as well? Well, I was looking at my options, what I wanted or what I needed. First of all, the difficulty was, well, there is no official library, and I believe still not to date, as Go pretty much is not pitched to be on the user, or at least at the user interface side. And although there were some pitches, I believe there was even a Go X module started at some point in time and again abandoned. Even if you look at the awesome Go curated list, you see various libraries that are either wrappers around GTK or other user interface libraries, and with more or less good support, at least a few years back. Nowadays, there are some slight changes. Now I get to that. And the second difficulty I faced was that the display, or the majority of what I want to display, is actually rendered in an OpenShell context. So I have primarily an OpenShell window, and then on a secondary, I wanted to have some widgets for controls, for user interface controls. And the regular user interface libraries that you find typically control their own window. They have their own window lifecycle. They add the corresponding widgets and assume, well, you should, it's pretty much enough for you anyway to have this set of libraries. You don't necessarily have to have a dedicated OpenShell render context. There are some ways to around that. For instance, in HTML, in the web browser, you have the canvas where you can do the WebGL context. Then in Windows, for instance, you can create a sub-pane where you can open an OpenShell context and so forth. So there are possibilities nonetheless, yet it's always you have your user interface context, and within which you then have nested somewhere the OpenShell context. And why OpenShell, or what is the environment? Why am I running this? Well, first of all, I like OpenShell just from a personal preference. Yet in such environments, when you have these graphical applications, and most notably where we can get to them will be games, for instance, where you have either an OpenShell, DirectX, Vulkan render context, you have a high frame rate, so the whole window content is being rendered completely and with several times a second. Whereas the typical user interface libraries, they are geared towards, well, you render it once, and as long as nothing happens like resize or state changes, it must not be rendered a second time. And for this, while searching around for user interface libraries and options, I stumbled upon something new I didn't know about before. And this was the difference between retained mode and immediate mode user interface libraries. Whereas retained mode is pretty much the one mode everybody knows like, or I would assume the most people know like. Whereas in a retained mode, to give some classical code example, you have some form of window within which you add some content, you create new objects, new objects for the widgets. You add some properties like label text or whatever state there is, and you also register event handler. For the classical case would be the button, where you say, well, if the button is being pressed, then call this event handler and I can do something. And this one example that we have here, the new button that is being created receives the event handler to simply call quit. And furthermore, what you do is you delegate the whole runtime and also rendering to this application framework. And this means that the whole state, drawing, everything is pretty much retained within the user interface library. And all you are doing, or well, your production code is doing, set up the whole widget tree and then register event handlers. And perhaps at some point modify some properties. We have this in Swing, you have this also in HTML, for instance, where you have the corresponding DOM and register event handler. So, like I said, retained mode is pretty much the default that most people know. Yet, like I said, this retained mode is under control, or is typically under full control of the window, event handling, and everything. Whereas in my case, I'm running the render loop myself. I have my own pretty much control over the whole window, and I want to render the whole thing all the time. And this is where the immediate mode comes in. An immediate mode API turns it the other way around, this concept. First of all, you are in control of the render loop, which is here this symbolized endless loop. Whereas at the start, you always register, okay, I'm doing a new frame. For instance, in OpenShell would be clearing the frame buffer. And at the end of this loop, you then delegate the rendering for your scene, for instance. You also delegate the rendering to the swap buffer from OpenShell, for instance. And in between, you then also can add your corresponding user interface code, where one line already contains both the creation of the element as well its state and possibly state changes. This means here in this example, you see the EMGUI text hello world, which means only as long as this line is here present in this current render loop, the corresponding label will be present. The same with the EMGUI button. Only if this line is being executed during this one render loop, then this button will appear. And if during that render loop, the button was being activated typically by mouse click, then this function would return true. And this now turns it, well, like I said, the complete way around. It means instead of having some event handler and hoping that this hidden DOM tree or whatever the tree, a widget tree calls you back, here you are calling the controls, you are creating the controls, providing properties, and you receive the immediate response and immediate mode, whether or not something changed. And a similar would be for a text input, for instance. You can have one line where you say emgui.input text. You provide what the current value would be and receive already what and if the changed value is then. And with this crash course, let's have a look at live code and also the corresponding result. So I have, first of all, because it's a little bit larger, the current variant of my editor, where you see this window. For instance, you have various properties, slider, which can change values, all live. And all of this is rendered for each frame rendered within the editor. So this means while the same render loop that provides the background for the map here, I'm also having a separate section where it says, okay, I want to have a window with all these properties in there. And whenever there is a change in one of these properties, say this combo box uses a different value, then the following lines can already work with the new selected value. The reason I showed the label editor was just, well, okay, live images make more fun. And second is, I've got a 4K monitor and I ran out of time to provide the typical example window to be scaled enough. I hope it's somehow readable for you. Apart from that, I will simply, well, narrate what I'm doing here. So this library that I was using is called EMGUI, which is, I would say, pretty much the forerunner of the immediate mode libraries, which is actually a C library, and I want to find the proper window to get to. Yeah, which is on GitHub EMGUI, which is a C library, C++ library, and provides all these features, and it's a widely common and loved library, also looking by the stars and essentially usage of the whole thing. And I went forward and created a wrapper for this library. And this wrapper is then also, and I also created a corresponding example by which to showcase this, which means this demo window comes from EMGUI, and I'm creating this as part of my example, within which I can show basic properties, all that they're working, have some combo boxes, for instance, here, the standard input text, in which I can enter values and so forth. And this demo, this debug window here, is the one that is provided as the example. And how does it come together in the example code? For this, I'm switching over to the editor. And here in the core of this example, there is this one run method, which has the endless loop, like I showed before. And as part of this endless loop, first of all, the necessary code to process any events from the current event loop, like processing mouse clicks, keyboard input events, and so forth. Then register at the renderer, at the platform, okay, I'm going to render a new frame. And then also tell EMGUI, the one library I'm using here, I'm starting a new frame. And everything that happens now between this new frame and later on the EMGUI render is now part of the window, or rather part of the whole scene. And the examples here are, for instance, show a simple window, have a text with Unicode support, the classical hello world, a slider, which here provides a slider from 0 to 1.0, and receives the pointer to the corresponding value to change. This means when I go over to this debug, to this example, I have this slider here. And whenever I modify this slider by usage of the mouse or other user input, I immediately receive the resulting value in F. So I pass in what's the current value, and if something changes, I receive the changed value back. And if I wanted to, I can even have a condition, because slider float would return Boolean true if the value changed. Similar with a color edit. So the GUI library comes with a further color editor, which allows to modify color values as well, either here with 3 integrated sliders for the color, or even a pop-up window. So yes, there are some integrated widgets as well, giving you some options, mainly for graphical and or debugging purposes. And this is one of the, I would say, side notices of this thing. At least GUI is rather geared towards debugging or tools. It's not necessarily for I'd say production user interfaces in terms of end user interfaces. One example is that all the labels that you see of these controls are always on the right. You can't put it on the left, for instance. Now, all of these controls have some sort of name. Here, this slider float has the label float, and this label is always on the right side. So by this, you can somewhat identify an GUI user interface. Checkboxes are similar. You provide in the current value, and if during this current render loop the checkbox is being clicked or changed, then this checkbox is immediately changed. Sorry, the Boolean is immediately changed, returned. Here we have this button example. Whenever the button is clicked, increment this counter. And the same counter is now also then displayed later on with a text. So coming over to this example, I have this button, and every time I click, it's been incremented. And also note, yes, there is still some state in this user interface library. Even if I press and hold, it will not run up infinitely, or at least or continuously. So it means the button function only returns true if there is a state change, not a pending state, so to speak. So you don't have to count clicks or count frames or something like that. This is as much intelligence that you receive from this library. You will it returns true only if there's the state change once. And with the same logic, here this show another window is bound to this Boolean, which is dependent on that checkbox. And this show another window is also bound to what is here called begin. This opens up yet another window, meaning I have here there's another window checkbox. When I change the Boolean flag, it tells the code here by this if show another window to render this other window. If this Boolean is not set, the whole code is not executed. So during this render pass, the window is not even created. It's not even present in the whole UI stack. And because this Boolean flag is also passed into this begin, it can be combined, because this Boolean flag is also changed if I close the window by the traditional way of this X button at the top, which then immediately also changes the checkbox value of another window. Why? Because it's the same Boolean. So I can toggle this Boolean either by the checkbox, or because this begin call from the window told me, well, in the change from the previous frame to the new frame, the user pressed on the X button to close it, sets it false, and the next render loop already has it false again. This also works here. There's another example then. This button, close me, show another window again, close. So I can show the window with the checkbox. I have this close me, and same effect. I have the immediate control of all the states. And then this demo window is a built-in functionality from GUI for this library, where pretty much the whole feature set of GUI is being shown. What I have not yet done is port the complete GUI library or at least expose it on Go, I saw myself, or at least I realized I became a maintainer for this library because GUI is quite popular, and apparently I'm the only one at this point providing a corresponding wrapper. So this library already has some users, and people are providing pull requests and changes. And one question I did not yet address is, where is the window itself? Well, this is being handled by another library. So this EM-GUI library is only responsible for creating a render list for all the graphical details to be drawn, which means EM-GUI itself does not come with a window system. It does not come with OpenGL drawing primitives. It doesn't even know about OpenGL. This is realized by abstracted render lists that are created during this EM-GUI render call, which means when I'm done with all my user interface controls that I wanted within this current frame, I call EM-GUI render, and this creates a list of information to render, essentially triangles and the colors and transparency values, which are then rendered in a dedicated step, where you can retrieve the EM-GUI render draw data and provide it to this render implementation. In my example case, it's either OpenGL 2 or OpenGL 3. And this then handles all the actual drawing of the user interface. This also means that as long as I do not call render with this EM-GUI render draw data, nothing is shown. So only then here the actual modification of pixels or the frame buffer is being done. And typically, within all of this, I could have my regular production code rendering or drawing stuff in the frame buffer, and only afterwards I present as the last instance this user interface. So it's agnostic to the actual render system. In my example, I used OpenGL 2 and 3. The original EM-GUI comes with examples for DirectX as well as Vulkan, even a software renderer, if I'm not mistaken. Which leaves the last question: how is the window being created? This also is up to you, how you want to do it. In my example here, I have both variants for GLFW, which I am also using for my editor, as well as SDL2, which I don't have running on this machine, so trust me, it works. So I have some sort of a platform which provides the windowing system, also the interfacing to keyboard, mouse, and everything. In this case, I'm delegating to the GLFW wrapper for Go. And similar then, how is it being drawn? This is done using OpenGL in my example here. And here I'm also using the OpenGL wrapper for Go. So this was then pretty much the revelation on how to do this, because it, well, turns the whole thing upside down. You have the graphical context, and within which you then have the user interface controls pre-rendered or pre-calculated by another library, in this case EM-GUI. So next up then, is EM-GUI the only one? No, there are alternatives. Well, first of all, Inky Blackness, that's the name of the project for my editor. I have this EM-GUI Go wrapper itself, one example. Then I had a few months ago, I did some early tests, or at least some, well, have a look at it, of Raylib.go. Raylib is another original C library, if I'm not mistaken, which has also a Go wrapper. This Raylib has also already included the windowing system and drawing code. So this is more like a all-in-one package. You don't have to handle OpenGL, you don't have to handle windowing systems. Yet from the API perspective, you're still in a regular render loop within which you create the whole UI stack. I know of this Nuclear library, yet another wrapper. I haven't worked with it. I only saw it recently by searches, and I'm sure there will be others. And then there is something, well, separate, which is the GUI, for which I've seen a talk at the GopherCon last year in UK. And there was also at least one other talk and another GopherCon, which is even a separate approach. It's still an immediate mode user interface library, yet it comes with everything included. And with everything, I mean, it's first of all in Go exclusively, so it's not a wrapper over C, and it provides its own compilation targets for various systems. So you can run the same application on iOS, on Android, on Linux, on macOS, and even using WebAssembly in WebGL. And this means, yes, you have here the same Go code can produce various native libraries. And here you have this example here in WebAssembly. And that's behind that there is Go code, not transpiled, but rather compiled to WebAssembly. From my personal opinion, I'm still a little bit skeptical to some degree on GUI. It looks promising, though it's not yet as mature like the other libraries, because here you have mainly but basic controls. You also are missing some simple features like selecting text. Although I can edit this text from this application, I can't select it so far. I'm also not sure how far they are right now. Other features like full screen or changing the window title are not yet implemented. Possibly also because, it wants to target everything and you can't open a separate window in an Android, let's say, or a typical mobile application. So, and the code itself has no example here. So the second point why I'm a little bit more skeptical about it is it does not feel as simple as an EMGUI, for instance. Whereas in EMGUI you would write, or Railib as well, where you would write just one line to specify a button or a text. In GUI you still have to instantiate some sort of a text object on which you then have to run some sort of update logic as well. That's my personal opinion. I'm a little more skeptical, yet still motivated enough to give it another look if I wanted to, I don't know, create something like a production or end user application targeting more than one target system. And I do want to write it in Go. So at this point, I would definitely consider GUI and perhaps even push it forward to support it. And with that, I have no idea how long it took for my talk, and I say thank you for your patience. So how do we
Great. You were about 28 minutes, so you were quite spot on.
Great.
Thanks for the great talk. We have a top commentator, top question giver here, namely Rodolfo. He commented, "That looks awesome," when you showed some code. And then the question that we can start with it: do you have any drawbacks of using Go for doing GUIs, your level editor?
None at all. First of all, I wanted to use Go also to essentially practice and get better at Go, and so that I wrote the second editor variant. I could get rid of various, I would say, wrong Go code or not so idiomatic Go code. And so it's primarily for me, it was primarily an exercise. And apart from that, I do not see any hindrance of using it for a user interface. Because at its core, it's a programming language like any other. And the language itself doesn't get into your way when you want to do a user interface or whatever purpose it is.
Any more questions, guys? I think we are still 9 people watching. So if you have been watching and you have any questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to write in the chat.
Should I write it down, or may I just ask another question?
Sure.
So did you consider, like, if you're using this new GIO library, it doesn't depend on CGO, right?
Correct. It directly imports the necessary libraries. It creates its own OpenGL context from the corresponding GL libraries, and so on and so forth.
So I wonder if that was also something that, like, because a lot of times we try to write things in pure Go. Like, do you think it would be a big advantage for you to drop like CGO and do pure Go, or it doesn't matter for you?
For me, it wouldn't matter, because at least for my application, for my editor, I'm targeting a desktop system. So where I have, I would say, the proven libraries like GLFW or something like that, and proper access to OpenGL. Whereas in different environments, say mobile application, it's essentially a different context. You also have some sort of an OpenGL or drawing context, yes, sure. It's pretty much a different environment. And if I'm not sure. I believe there is some support for at least GLFW on a mobile phone. I'm not so sure about SDL, or I'm mixing it up. Either way, since I'm dependent on some libraries, I would have to take all these dependencies with me if I would target the mobile environment, or even WebGL, where it's even more stringent, I would guess.
Right.
Okay.
So can you tell us more about your game or live editor? Like I really like the screens and like how it looks.
Well, thank you. Well, the look and feel is one I picked, and some users of the games community told me that they like I seemingly kept the style of the user interface in the style of the game. So System Shock itself is a DOS game, originally a DOS game from 1994, about it's pretty much topic on cyberpunk, where you are a hacker on a derelict space station where a rogue AI runs havoc, and you have to stop this AI. At its core, it's probably comparable to the regular shooters of the 90s, yet it has some, say, horror elements, it has story elements, and some sort of role-playing elements. So it's difficult to compare because System Shock was so radical, I would say, new back in that day, that it's pretty much an underdog of the past. And it had a second installment in 1999, System Shock 2, and only recently, a few years back already, another company, Night Dive Studios, acquired the license to the game and the source code, and they are now creating a re-implementation for the original game, for original System Shock, and another studio is creating System Shock 3 to be finished whenever. And the bittersweet story of the whole thing is I started reverse engineering, or at least I helped reverse engineer the data files back in 2001 already. There was a small project started in the UK, and already some early experiences with open source software and distributed development. And I helped try to decode the data files because we didn't know anything about it. We only had the final files, and we knew the game also almost by heart.
That sounds like a new talk topic. I'd love to hear about that.
Reverse engineering, yeah, that's this many years, and the bittersweet part of this was then this company that acquired the license to the source code open sourced the source code. So I spent months and years about decoding and looking at hex bytes, and then all of a sudden there's the whole source code. So it was about half a year after I released the first version of the editor, and it was great. At least I had some people create some first levels, and they even made news that after 24 years after the game was released, the first fan mission was released, which was great to have this as well. And and at least I could verify then whatever I and the people before me decoded from and described, that it's pretty much matched up with everything that we decoded. So the source code gave us the final proof, let's say it this way.
Cool. Nice. I'll definitely check out System Shock. I think I might have seen, because when I Google it, it seems familiar, but I don't think I really played that.
Well, it's one. If you like science fiction, cyberpunk, this is the one game where the dead people's logs came from. Where in whatever game you run around and you find some audio recordings of people, System Shock was the one that started with it.
Okay. Now we have a question. We'll put it live here. Triggertree, I think. How do you separate presentation and logic with immediate mode GUIs? Is this even possible?
I would say yes. What I've seen is, okay, otherwise, if you want to separate, yes, it's definitely possible. The intention for where they come from, these immediate mode user interfaces, is in games where whatever you're currently doing, you right now need a button. You simply create this button and there you go, or have some text field that shows whatever value is. So correct. So the original intention, or at least the typical use case, is whatever you're currently doing, you want to have some sort of debug output, and you can work with that. So yeah, this would be a tight coupling of the actual logic with the user interface. Whereas if you want to separate it, I believe the most compatible variant would be model view model, because like I shown you, the properties or the let's say simple booleans or text that you would have to show and perhaps modify match quite good to the model view model pattern, where you have the controls directly mapped to the view model and work on that, and you have some sort of logic then in the background updating this view model. And if you want to have the controls like the events, then you can, whenever you have this change register, you call your corresponding, say, logic function that does all the thing and in turn updates the view model. You somewhat, well, do again the separation into where you closely get to retained mode then, because then this whole state is that that represents this user interface is based on the view model. So I guess this then becomes the gray area. So yeah, it's possible.
Cool. More questions?
I have a question, observation. Like I was kind of feeling like this is somewhat similar to React, and I think like Rob has also the front end experience here. Maybe you've worked with React before, Rob, or currently?
I briefly, but I'm more, my specialty is Vue.
Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking like this is pretty similar to how like you write components in React. If Christian, you have experience with that, or
it's the same model in Vue anyway. So yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And I just found a comment here on like Wikipedia, and a comment I think from the author of Dear IMGU, like saying that okay, this is similar. This is indeed similar paradigm than what's used in React.
Yeah. I have very limited knowledge about React. So still, essentially yes, because you only create or you only request the user interface library to draw or create a button or a list or whatever if some specific condition is set. Let's say in this view model, if you have this property set, then yes, only then the corresponding interface is being control is being created and rendered.
Mm-hmm. It sounds familiar, though. You have more fine-grained possibilities in these modern JavaScript frameworks, depending on if you render it and have it only rendered on a condition, or if you hide it. So basically, it's rendered but display or opacity 0, for example, and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. But definitely the same type of reactivity, or yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you mean another talk on reverse engineering?
Yeah, I remember having seen some stuff of people, but that was not Go, and it was I can't remember if it was like a console picking apart a cartridge or something, and because it was so low level, even with like hardware embedded stuff, which is really not my forte, I kind of just remember the talk topic was fascinating, but I didn't really get much knowledge out of it, other than it's a long, tedious process that requires deep interest and self-motivation. Yes. I think. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, I can tell from my experience, because I spent weeks, months, even years on the whole thing. Not all the years between 2001 and now. I had some breaks in between. So definitely there went a lot of spare time into it and private time. And also here then Go helped, because when I picked it up, the whole thing in 2015 again, I wanted to start very small, and the smallest thing I could think of was, if I can open up these resource files, take apart all the resources that are in there, so the general format was already known, and if I can repackage them and so that the game would still run. Then I have the first step. And to do that, I wrote a very simple Go program to open up and close. And the next step was then create a very basic hex editor, for instance. And this again, I used Go and only used the text mode interface. And so somewhat an interactive hex dump, I would say. And then you start looking at some hex codes the whole day, toggle some hex code, start the game up and see what changed. Run around the game and see if something that was green is now blue or something like that.
Cool. Prost to everyone, virtual and here in the group. Yeah, cool. Any more questions or topics for discussion? We could, of course, continue as we go. I think there's a new one here. Good stuff. Ivan Czech, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your surname. How Golang use assembly would be nice talk. Rob Pike, something like that, when they switched from C-Go to pure Go. Okay, I'm not familiar with the Rob Pike talk on Golang and assembly, but definitely lots of good talks from Rob Pike.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about that one is that Go uses an assembly format from, I think, Plan 9, as a lot of other things in the tooling, and is the same assembly language for all platforms. So
we could maybe get Aram, who's been going to some of the meetups. He's sorry.
Yeah. Just saying, like, I'm not the guy to talk about that, but I did watch this talk, and it's also quite interesting.
Yeah. We have a local meetup attendee or a member of the group that worked on, I think, at least the ARM compiler is by him in Go and another one. And I know there was some talks about Plan 9 or like those kind of Solaris background as well. But if we get him to chime in with some knowledge or give a talk, we would definitely love to have him on. Yeah.
Alan, if you're there or watch the recording, it's talking about you.
Yes.
I mean, I also learned about C-Go as part of this adventure, I would say, because EMGUI is only available as a C++ library, so I needed to have some sort of wrapper of in Go written. So I had to have a look at how exactly it works. Does this C-Go interaction work? How can you make best use of it? So yeah, like I said, it was an exercise, or it still is an exercise project. I'm still working on the editor, as not all the functions are in there that the game provides. And so as part of this, I also learned how to use C-Go. So if there's another recommendation I can give for anyone, for exercises, pick one hobby project and go with it.
So how much code do you have to write to make the glue code between the IMGU library and like your Go code?
At this point, very little. So for one function, I would add, in a typical case, 2 lines, 2 netto lines. So one line would be the Go code calling the C function, and I have a C function which then delegates to the C++ variant, because I wanted to avoid, or I had to avoid, the C++ interface of EMGUI, and I first have to convert it down to a C interface, by which I then can go into Goland and back.
Okay.
So for each one functionality that there is in EMGUI in the C++ interface, I have one C function that acts as a bridge, and this C function is the endpoint to Go where I add then the other function. And thankfully to the community, there are quite a lot of contributors already adding functions to this. So at this point, I believe it's almost more contributions than my initial pitch. Well, I provided the core, which I needed for my editor, and meanwhile people are adding further.
So you can't like auto-generate the. So like if IMGU changes, you have to keep adding things and making changes manually. Is that
correct? This was pretty much my deliberate choice. First of all, because I didn't know about auto generation. Well, to be precise, I did somewhat know about auto generation, though I'm not very happy about it. Why? Because the auto generation must either take the very naive approach or create something that, have to work with. You might not be happy about it, yet it's something that is provided. Prime example is in C++, you have the ability to have default parameters. So you could call, the example was with the button, for instance. The C++ variant would allow you to create a button by just providing the label text. Yet there are also some default parameters that I believe specify the size of the button or something like that. And an auto-generated code would then probably create, I don't know, for each option parameter separate permutation and only spew out this function and even not provide any documentation and some, I'm reaching out here, I haven't seen it precisely. And and with my approach, with the hand-picked approach, I can specify, okay, this is the idiomatic variant of a button call, and this is the verbose variant of the button call. And in both cases, I can also add corresponding documentation.
Right.
So there is, for C, there has been created an auto-generated C wrapper for EMGUI, which I could have taken now, which in this case would add another dependency. So if there is a change in the original EMGUI, I would have to wait until this auto-generated one is updated, and then I could add on or even have an auto-generated Go code.
Right.
Then would then like out the comments and find details and whatnot. So
you manually maintain both C and Go adapters?
No, only the Go adapter. It's not my adapter that was the auto-generated. It's a different
okay. Cool.
There's a question, I think a follow-up to us discussing CGO, but correct me if I'm wrong. These packages are safe. What do you do if they change with upgrades of Golang?
Okay, I'm with you. I'm not quite sure what the context would be, but if the question is about all the packages I'm dependent on, like SDL or GLFW or even EMGUI, in this case, I would say it's the beauty that we have now module system where we can version, and in at least for GLFW and the SDL and OpenShell, they are versioned, and even if not, I have at least a direct binding to the corresponding commit in the Go mod file. As for my wrapper, this was also a deliberate choice for me. I'm trying to uphold the semantic versioning contract, which means if there are changes in the original EMGUI library, I would have to bump the corresponding version and adopt the wrapper, which I already did once. So my wrapper of EMGUI is already in version 2.00 or 2xx in this case. And as for if the change with upgrades of Golang, well, in this case, I would defer to the compatibility promise of Go itself.
Cool. Of course, if any more questions, otherwise we've been going for an hour, so we can slowly also fade out and wrap up. Let me just check here. How's it going for you guys in terms of coding and quarantine or lockdown time? Do you find yourself coding more or less?
Well, I have to be honest, I did find more time to work on this editor again. I'm currently working on the cutscene feature. So the game has a few cutscenes, and I'm now adding an editor for the movies of the game as well.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So more time.
Refocused.
Yeah. I have 2 kids, and Rodolfo, I think he can mention himself the situation there. But I find myself having less time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, coding still didn't change much. I'm working from home.
Yeah. It's the same for me. It's with having 2 kids, and I have friends without kids or colleagues that talk about all the time they have extra now, and I'm like, what time? Like, I sit at home, I get up, I get the kids ready, or food. I eat, then I work, and then I finish working. The kids are already impatient. Then it's a little bit of time together, and then it's bedtime, household stuff, and then maybe it's either like coding, playing games, or watching TV with my wife, and then TV with my wife mostly wins, and then it's bedtime. Rinse, repeat. So Not enough hours in the day
Yeah.
still. No.
Mm.
But good. Anything
Mhm.
else that you want to address before we end the call? Thanks again, Christian. And
Thank you
we'd
for
love
having
to
me.
have you back. Yeah.
We have some comments here on YouTube.
Yeah. So Ariel, he's been really productive, creative with open source work, really good.
Yeah.
So
Like in the current time.
quarantine is amazing. Good. You're kind of like forced to sit down and, when you had excuses before that you didn't have enough time for stuff, when you now find yourself maybe sitting and having enough time, then it's good to actually use the time for catching up with open source work. That's good. Thanks, Stefan. Thanks for joining and being here with us. Yeah, just an apropos to that, I also joining the other meetups. I'm also more involved with the Vue community. So even though I don't have time, I always get to do a bit more of the meetup work in a varied way, and I can do that as part of my daytime work. So it's nice to be part of the community and give back for sure. Open source is good. So I guess we can end on that note. Everyone that's bored or don't know what they should do, they should definitely contribute to open source Golang projects or other preferred open source initiatives. Feel free to give back now that you have enough time on your hand, if you do. Stefan likes it virtual. He likes this. I think Stefan has been really active commenting on us in Twitter and other social media, but he hasn't been, correct me if I'm wrong, so often lately to meetups. So maybe it's a good chance for having some of the people that haven't been able to come in physical form to now be able to join us virtual, which is nice. If we accept talks only for Go libs or also for projects realized in Go, anything related to Golang, like code is preferred, or anything with the demo code, live code, but there's no hard requirements. If you want to talk about your experience learning Go, or if you want to talk about mental health for Golang developers, like we can really stretch it because we don't have that many local speakers. We would of course love to have some international speakers, but then we need some budget for that. But the long story short, anything in Go, and we have very low requirements. Just ping us, and we can shape a talk or help give you feedback on any ideas you might have. Yeah, Stefan is saying he's not so often lately, but it's easy to attend virtual like this. So our plan is to keep this up. Looking at the news recently, I think there will be nothing until earliest, maybe end of June, July, that is allowed to be sort of events. So we cannot organize anything physical probably before July, and then it's summertime. So we'll probably have at least May, June, maybe July, depending on vacation, like this. So yeah.
More virtual meetups are coming.
Yes.
Welcome to the future.
Yeah. It's nice. Or not nice, the circumstances, but it's nice that we get to be able to experiment with this and get more familiar. It also means that we could maybe have, in between when we're back physical, we have a monthly physical meetup. We could, of course, every now and then have like a, virtual Friday pint or virtual Friday, let's have a group discussion or a mini talk or something in addition as well, or we could mix it up. So it gives us the flexibility to cater to a bigger audience and to also go virtual. Yeah. Cool. Well, then let's give it 15 more seconds to open to give the chat a chance. But otherwise, I think we'll call it a day. We've been going an hour and 5 minutes. The recording will be, if I remember from last time, more or less immediately. You will be able to see the recording. We'll also share it in the comments. I'm sharing the screen here of our meetup, so I'm sure not all of you watching are necessarily coming from meetup.com. We have a meetup group, so feel free to join us there, so we'll get notifications on upcoming meetups. Here is Roland, who together with Aram, and I think Matthias was in the call earlier. I don't think Kost is here, was he was hosting a dinner for the 10th anniversary in December, or the anniversary was in December, November, but we had the celebration.
It was in November, yeah, but we had the celebration in December, and this pizza is making me hungry now.
Yeah. Nice. So go and have a look at the photos, sign up, follow, and if you are a member and you like this meetup, please leave a review. And if you need to leave a comment to leave your review, just write like awesome, amazing, just something. And the more reviews we get, the more people will notice Golang and the meetup group. So it's a self-serving review. Well then, let's call it today. And thanks so much for joining again. Thanks for coming, Christian. Thanks for co-organizing, Rodolfo.
Yeah, thank you, Rob.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.